Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Carleton University, Steve Saideman. It's been a week, um, and there's been a lot of shifting conversation in terms of what's going on with Iran, what's Canada's policy position. That's shifted about three times now. Steve wrote a good piece on his blog about that. I will put the link on that below. But Steve, let's try and figure out what we think is happening.
Well, good to see you. Yeah, I don't blame the Carney people from being confused about what's going on because these are confusing times. But as I said in my piece, Davos is not a clear roadmap for dealing with crises. So the first statement that the prime minister put out could be seen as Davos-like in the sense that, hey, we have no principles, we're just doing stuff to get through this. And then the second statement was like, hey, the United States is not all that reliable, so therefore it fits Davos too. But the fact that they had to issue two statements back to back and then confound things a little bit further by saying, well, we're not going to rule anything out. I think that was more of a Canadian media problem and less of a Carney problem. I think,
Yeah, that latter part was certainly a Canadian media problem of
yeah,
let's take a statement that is hedging and catastrophize it.
I got a whole lot of media asking me right after it happened to explain what are we going to do in this war. And the answer I was giving, which they didn't really appreciate, was nothing. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to send forces to fight to drop bombs on Iran. We're not going to send conventional forces. We're not going to send special operations forces. The one thing I can imagine us doing is we could send a frigate to participate in any kind of naval convoy escort thing to get the tankers out of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could possibly imagine. But I think with Carney was being asked, would you rule out doing something? And he's like, no, I'm not gonna rule out everything. Just it was. I think it was. I think that part was sort of the most reasonable stance thus far. Of well, it's too
Yeah.
soon to say what we're going to do.
Yeah, and there's also been a whole lot of let's say I'm not going to say confusion. I'm going to say people who don't quite know what they're talking about when it comes to NATO and Article 5 and any missiles that might land on Turkey.
Oh, did you see my fight with it?
That's also been around the discussion, and there's a bunch of us who are kind of like, no, Article 5 doesn't work like that. But we've had this discussion on here before, but it's also entered into the chats, so to speak.
Well, I got into a bit of a spat with the defense editor for The Economist because he was one of the ones saying, "Oh, missile lands in Turkey it might lead to Article 5 being invoked." And one of the things that people really underestimate is how little most of the alliance really cares about Turkey or is willing to do something to support Turkey specifically.
Yeah.
Um, that Article 5 requires consensus, and good luck in consensus when Greece is a member of the alliance and we'll try to block anything helping Turkey. That now there's a subgroup within the alliance that is pretty much pro-Russia, which would be Slovakia and Hungary. So they're probably not going to sign up for anything.
Yeah.
Um, so I just that was I just that's just not in the cards. Particularly one stray missile, I just don't think is going to cut it. Now, if the tanks rolled across from someplace into Turkey or someplace from Belarus into the Baltics, then Article 5 becomes something significant. Although Donald Trump has done his best to undermine the alliance,
Yeah.
but the war is expanding enough as it is. We can focus on the things that have happened, such as the United States submarine sinking a ship way, way, way outside the conflict zone. Uh,
Which was unarmed and coming back from an exercise in India, I believe.
yeah, I'm not so fussed about the whole unarmed thing.
Okay.
Warships are warships. Uh, it was both using submarine, which is, we haven't, the United States actually, and this is one thing that Hegseth got right, which I hope no lightning strikes me. Um, but the United States hasn't sunk a submarine, an American submarine hasn't sunk a ship since World War II. And during World War II, the United States had an incredibly successful submarine offensive against the Japanese. In fact, wildly underestimated in terms of its role in putting the Japanese into a position where they would surrender. But when we're not in a World War I, World War II situation, using submarines is very controversial because there's all kinds of rules that are supposed to be followed. Like you're supposed to help rescue the people that you sink, and submarines never do that, but they're supposed to do that.
Hmm.
And so uh, I am old enough, you are not, to remember the war over the Falklands, but since I'm in Brazil, I'll call it the Malvinas, since I'm pretty sure that's how it goes in South America. In that war over the Falklands, the British submarine sank the largest warship that the Argentinians had, killing thousands, hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And everyone was sort of like outraged. I was like, well, it wasn't exactly in the quarantine zone around the Falkland Islands, but if Argentinians have a battleship or a destroyer or a cruiser in the neighborhood, or actually anywhere in the South Pacific, the South Atlantic, then it's fair game.
Yeah.
But even that was controversial, and that was a war, and that was legitimately a warship that was thinking about attacking Britain sometime. It was explained to me by a friend of mine that the reason for this might have been not just Pete Hegseth demonstrating that he's a real man, but that in any effort to deal with the Strait of Hormuz, you want to sink pretty much everything that the Iranians have, so that way they would only be able to rely on speedboats and drones and missiles. You don't want the Iranians to have any kind of navy whatsoever, because while their frigate might not do well against an American frigate, it certainly can do just fine against a tanker.
Yeah.
And so that makes some kind of sense. On the other hand, submarines are very good at trailing ships and could have waited until it was no longer in the neighborhood, because the United States is trying to have a decent relationship with India, and this was very insulting to India.
Yeah.
On the other hand, being close to Sri Lanka meant that some of the people could be rescued by the Sri Lankan Navy. So,
Okay. Um, One of the other kind of subplots that I've sort of followed is, regime change, not regime change. Trump wants a say in who the new leader is going to be, saying he's not that interested in making this democracy. I heard a really good Radio Atlantic piece with Ann Applebaum and an Iranian writer who basically were talking about how there's no real organized opposition within the country, and no real civil society organization that can help take over in the event of some kind of regime change. And I just wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts on that aspect of this whole conflict.
of the entire thing, that dimension shows how little planning and thought they've done. Like, at least, I mean, again, all this stuff makes the Bush government look competent, because the Bush folks in 2003 were working with the Iraqi diaspora. It turns out the Iraqi diaspora they were working with happened to star a guy, Chalabi, who happened to be an agent of the Iranians. But they had in mind something to put in there. Now, the grandson or the great grandson of the Shah of Iran is like, I'll do it. But nobody is taking that very seriously.
Yeah.
They just haven't done the work. A, they haven't done the homework. They didn't do any preparation. B, they don't really know what they want. And you see,
Yeah.
I mean, you see that because they're making some different statements. We're trying to do regime change. We're not trying to do regime change. What is it that they want? And I think, part of the problem is that you've got a two-country alliance, the United States and Israel, where the Israelis seem to know what they want, and which is they want Iran to be just shattered.
Yeah.
And they don't mind having a failed state where Iran used to be, which is an interesting move, but take a look at what happened when we did that to Libya, and that hasn't been good for the region. And Libya was a much less relevant country, didn't have a lot of oil, didn't have a nuclear weapons program, yada, yada, yada. So,
Yeah,
creating a
and
failed
it
state,
seems
a
to me
bad idea
also
in
just,
general.
in Iraq and the rise of ISIS that came out of essentially the failed state that was happening there.
Well, that was more of a Syria to Iran thing, Iraq thing, but the Syria also shows that you have a civil war. You don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come out of it. We do know that killing lots of people tends to radicalize them, rather than the survivors. And so
Yeah,
the United States has had a bad relationship with Iran for quite some time. Contrary to what the Trump regime would suggest, the United States has not been at war with Iran since 1979. But it's been a bad relationship, and it's not going to get any better blowing things up. There certainly were Iranians who were protesting the regime, who their Iranian repression was brutal.
yeah,
Um, and so there was potentially some people who might want to have the regime changed, but having protesters who want the regime changed and having some sort of plug and play new set of people to throw in are two different things. And it's not that the Iranian people get to have a vote, but the legacy of the regime get to have a vote. And there's still the religious order that's there
hmm
that Khomeini was in charge of, and now his son apparently is in charge of. There's still the Revolutionary Guard types are still there. This is not Libya where you knock over one guy. Like we killed Gaddafi, and that completely disabled the country more or less. But they're already in the middle of a civil war.
yeah.
They, I'm not an Iranian expert, but it's clear that there's a whole lot more going on in that country in terms of governance and layers of government. And if we really had a plan for replacing the government, then maybe the United States shouldn't be like striking the moderate types who might be those people.
Yeah.
So I don't think they have a clue as to what they're doing.
All right. And circling back to Davos, there's been some good commentary this week about how really Carney's speech there was kind of a Rorschach test, where everyone kind of imports their priors. But it's also starting to seem to me like there's a bit of a fundamental incoherence around well, rule of law was hypocritical, and now we're at the same time saying we should be following international law. This attack broke international law, that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering if there's any needle that can be threaded here, or if we're just kind of like grasping at straws.
Well, one way to read the Davos statement is to suggest that we're not bound by anything. Um, and therefore, every decision is to be about being what's best for Canada. Uh, and and so the problem is that that's a pretty still broad thing, but it does suggest, if we're really opposed to Iran, then maybe supporting Americans in this would be fine. Um, there's domestic politics to this, which is there were big rallies of Iranian Canadians who are opposed to the regime.
Yeah,
So,
there's a big diasporic community in this
yeah.
country.
So is Carney playing to that? Because I used to study diasporas, and one from a rule of diasporas is they're more extreme than the people that from where they left because they're the ones who left.
Yeah.
And so like I'll besmirch a different ethnic group. The Croatians who came to Canada in the aftermath of World War II were the losers of the World War II Civil War in Yugoslavia. Well, who are they? They were the Nazis. And so we had a fair amount of pretty extreme Croatians in Canada. And so when there's a war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, they're the first ones saying, "Hey, let's kill Serbs."
Mm.
Um, and I don't know anything about the Iranian diaspora in Canada, but maybe they favored this. But they're also the ones who don't have to pay price for the war. So
Yeah.
it's easy for them to cheer on intervention. And they might have also thought, to be fair, that they thought that the United States might have a clue as to what they're doing. Um,
Which was
but
quickly, that notion was quickly disabused.
I mean, yes, and to be clear, there's a couple of things going on here with the United States and all this, which I know better, which
Yeah.
is if you're qualified and knowledgeable, then you're disqualified for the Trump administration because that knowledge is woke.
Yeah.
The Bush administration did a good job of saying, "Hey, if you know too much about Iraq, you're probably going to say things that you're saying things that's going to be hard. If you're saying it's hard, then we got to get rid of you because that's critical of the war." And they
Yeah.
ignored people who were willing to actually help the American government do things better in Iraq in 2003. Well, this government is much more desiring to have only yes people around them, and so they've gutted the leadership of the U.S. military. They've gutted the State Department, and they didn't tell anybody what they were doing, so nobody could say boo about it. But it also meant that you had embassies that were wildly unprepared for what was going to come next, which was both drones and efforts to get Americans out of the conflict zone.
Yeah.
They didn't consult allies. So that meant that Canadians were left in the conflict zone. The Canadian government wasn't really well prepared. I don't think that's an intelligence failure or a mistake that the Carney government made. It was that their ally did not act like an ally. And maybe that's one of the things that should be remembered from the Davos statement, which is the United States is now a lousy ally, and we need to think accordingly. So when they're making all kinds of noises about Iran, the
Yeah.
more I think about planning potential need for evacuations, even if we're not being told there is a need for evacuations.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's one thing that they could have done a bit better on our side. Um, yeah, but I mean, the American government's mishandling this because there's a bunch of incompetents who don't really know what they're doing and don't agree. I mean, Ruby and Hegseth aren't in agreement at all about this. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
grand tradition of the Secretary of State not to agree that much with Secretary of Defense. But Ruby is also the National Security Advisor, and his job is to actually get the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to at least cooperate enough to make their way through a crisis. And Rubio really sucks at both of his jobs. But the good news is he's got Pete Hegseth around,
Yeah.
who is just so wildly out of his depth. Um, the Secretary of Defense is supposed to be the grand strategist of the U.S. military, but he all for his entire year plus of being in office is a tactician. He cares about what the soldiers are wearing. He's not really that concerned with strategy because that requires you to sort of anticipate what the adversaries are doing, what the allies are do,
Yeah.
and then make your plans accordingly. And he has no sense of strategic empathy. That requires him to get out of his own head, and that is something he can't do.
Yeah. For sure. All right. Well, I think on that cheery note, we'll leave it for this week. Thanks again for doing this.
My pleasure, Dale.
All right. And we'll chat again in a few weeks.
Sure.
All right. Cheers. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.